Okay, everybody. So it's been a year since I've started a podcast, and one of my biggest mentors, Dr. Byron Braid, who is a trained psychiatrist here in the United States, who's been doing biological medicine for well over 45 years. He does tend to be a little more off the grid, as I would say, or what he calls, what was the terminology he used? Looking for his privacy. He enjoys his solitude. But we had asked him to do this, and it's taken us quite a few months to get it on the books, in all honesty. And this is a very special hour. So I really want to make sure that you have the time to listen to the whole thing. Make sure you get a pen and paper. This is definitely one you're going to want to probably listen to a couple times. This takes you through a thought process of why it's difficult for people to change. He speaks eloquently and deep all at the same time. And you can see why Byron Braid is one of our greatest mentors in not only biological medicine, but in the emotional world. And from that bioenergetic approach because of Wilhelm Reich. And that's what we're really going to be discussing today in depth is Wilhelm Reich and personal freedoms and freedom of choice and why modern civilization and society is talking about these, and then you will hear our retort about if we're accomplishing it or not, because I'm not afraid to argue even with my one of my greatest mentors. So I know you're all going to enjoy Dr. Byron Braid today, and I wish for all your comments and to keep on coming. I absolutely love them. And please make sure that you comment anything that you would like him to know as well, because I always love giving him such good feedback as we always get from our listenership. And we appreciate all your time and attention and understanding how the body really works and why change can be difficult at times, but now more than ever is when we need to really delve into what can help us all change and what can help our society and our personal freedoms to be assured. So welcome to this beat, truly from my heart to yours, the Beats with Kelly Kennedy, with Dr. Byron Braid. Back to the Beats with Kelly Kennedy, and I am very thrilled, honored, excited beyond. I know I always say I'm excited, but this one's a little bit more. So one of my largest mentors, my incredible colleague, my incredible friend, Dr. Byron Braid, who likes to enjoy his solitude, has finally agreed to do a podcast with us to answer the question that I know that only one person has a twist on this that I really want our audience to hear. And I'm going to ask that question in front of him. But Dr. Byron Braid has been a medical doctor, I don't know, 45 years, longer at this point, I don't know, a long time. He's been a psychiatrist and he studied biological medicine and been a pioneer of that medicine here in the United States, as well as all throughout Europe for, I don't know, 3 decades or more. I mean, forever, it seems like. And he would hate this term, but I'm going to use it anyway. He's one of the grandfathers of biological medicine. And without him, told you he'd laugh. Without him, in all honesty, Ayn and I would not know what we know about this medicine. We would have not had the ability to train like we were able to under him. And many of the doctors that worked with us here at True Wellness had the opportunity, as well as so many of our clients. So I know that this podcast from our heart to yours is going to hit so many in the heart, because they have missed you, so many of our clients, so many people in the United States. And so welcome, Dr. Braid. I'm going to try to keep it at Dr. Braid, but I can guarantee I'm going to call him Byron at some point. So welcome, Dr. Byron Braid, to the Beats.
Thank you, Kelly, and please call me Byron. You always do.
I know it'd be weird to call you Dr. Braid, actually, a little bit. So, but he totally deserves that. So here's the bottom line. We talk about on this podcast about how the body really works, right? We talk about the autonomic nervous system. We try to get people to understand that. One of the things that has come to my clarity in the last 15 months is how difficult it is for people to make a change. At the same time, how quickly changes happen that they get stuck into, and now it's difficult for them to change out of it. And so I figured there was nobody better to approach this subject than you, my psychiatrist mentor, and many things that we could talk about as he shakes his head for those that are listening. So why is it so difficult for people to change? And is there anything I missed? I mean, your CMV is ridiculous. Is there anything else you want to say about your CMV and what you've done and who you are?
No.
Okay, good. Can you answer, riddle me that, Batman? Can you tell me why the hell it is hard for people to change?
It's a very complicated perspective. Look, from my perspective, I see very little change going on. I see the appearance of change. I don't see very much change for the better. I see a deteriorating situation in, so to say, modern culture. And while there is more or less ravenous feeding on information, I don't think there's a lot of critical thinking going on out there. And while on the surface, there's lots of conversation about personal freedom and freedom of choice and things like this, people are following instructions slavishly without much thinking about it. And I don't think that that's anything new. I think that's modern civilization. I think modern civilization meaning the last couple thousand years, right?
Not 50 years, but 2,000 years of culture, society.
I don't really think there's revolutionary differences in how people process direction or function within governments. You know, I don't know, did you ever read Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel? Do you know this book?
I know the book. I started reading it amongst the piles, yes, but it's at my house.
Okay, well, I appreciate that book. I appreciate Jared Diamond.
I think I'm positive you were the one that told me to read it.
It could be, but you know, somewhere in the beginning, he talks about that he no longer differentiates democracies, communism, autocracies, democracies, so forth. He calls them all kleptocracies.
Kleptocracies?
Kleptocracies, right. They take money from the masses to feed the rulers. It doesn't matter what the rest of the structure is. So, you know, the modern world is going through that. And they're doing it through a lot of different ways. Either doing it financially, they're doing it with regulations. And people are just inhaling the direction. And, you know, what's going on now with the so-called pandemic is no different. And you can see how I will refer over and over again, as you know me through the years, to Wilhelm Reich's writings on this material. I mean, he started writing about these problems in the early 1930s. And, you know, he wrote a book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism, in which the first edition, written around 1933, and the last edition was written right after World War II. This book is completely relevant to the here and now. And we're falling apart.
Who is
obeying? It's more obedience training than anything else. And people, yeah, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, maybe for those who don't know, explain a little bit who Wilhelm Reich is, which you say much more German than I do, being Swiss now.
If I were really German, I'd say Wilhelm Reich.
He's actually from Philadelphia originally, but he's lived in Switzerland for many years. And sometimes he forgets his English words now.
It's true.
But it's so true. But Wilhelm Reich, Dr. Reich, who was he? Just so people who don't know can maybe research him a little bit. I mean, we'll put that in the show notes as well, but I think it's important, especially from your perspective of what your access to Wilhelm Reich's work has been. And
Wilhelm Reich was initially a psychoanalyst who moved into a biological understanding of emotions, character, and vegetative structure in the 1920s, and promptly found himself divorced from psychoanalysis. Continued on his biological work and ended up understanding the energetic basis of life from a Western biological perspective. He was reviled by the establishment and sadly jailed at the end of his life. He was the first person in American history to have his books burned officially by the federal government because they considered his writing to be so radical, and is the source of tremendous social and biological observation.
And this is the same gentleman that was writing books in the 1920s that are relevant to what's going on 100 years later. They burned his books in the 1950s, if I remember properly,
Yes.
And jailed him in the 1950s because it was so relevant. And here we are all these years later.
Totally relevant. Yep. So Reich discovered energetic pulsation, the source of energy, which he called orgone energy, and he was criticized, mischaracterized, vilified, but was a huge influence. And I think that energetic healing in the modern world owes a lot of debt to Reich's findings and his writings.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. There's, so much now about radionics. As you know, we had this conversation the other day, and so much about the quantum field and the quantum energetics. And this all seems like a new category of science. And I'm like, but this is what I've been looking at in the microscope for, almost 2 decades, that Wilhelm Reich and Professor Enderling, and this is what Byron taught me. And I get a feel for, one of the first things I remember you ever teaching me about looking at blood is don't get lost in the details, as I often did, and to get a feel for the blood as well, of what it felt energetically to me. And that's something I've taught clients to do as well. And it's been such an eye opener for people to write down 2 to 3 words of what your body feels. And yet that all comes from a whole different science of what Wilhelm Reich really discovered in the 1920s. 1920s.
Yeah, it's incredible to look back at the wealth of data that he produced. So, huge respect.
Yeah, huge respect. So, one of the books that you had recommended we read and keeps coming up for me in this last year and a half is Listen, Little Man.
So Listen, Little Man was essentially him getting rid of his frustration and anger. He says so at the beginning.
Yeah.
And in this book, he realized it before, but he speaks a lot about what he considers to be the biological miscalculation of man, and he talks a lot about how his realization that man was exhibiting an incapacity for freedom, that they look for leaders, they look to be led. And I think we're seeing this in our world in an expanded way. I think the main role that the media is serving, I don't mean from their attitudes, but the fact that we're able to communicate this way, it spreads information very, very quickly. And this is being used to scrape away the vestiges of freedom right now. Anybody who says anything that reflects negatively on the popular attitude is facing excommunication.
Yeah. Scrambling to find platforms that people can stay listening to the truth, to the uncensored, I should say. Whether it's truth or not, it's uncensored, because
it's the same over here.
Yeah,
it's the same in Europe. Switzerland, maybe a little bit less so, but in other parts of Europe, it's a very strong thing. Very, very strong meme to not say your mind.
And there's something what Reich had discovered, and what you're speaking about is the fact that there's something in the human ego and the human condition that disallows us to really, without consciousness, correct, to not really want this freedom, to look for others to lead us rather than be our own leader.
I would say it's chronic emotional suppression.
Unpack that, please, Byron. What does that mean? Chronic emotional suppression.
Socialization of children forces them to suppress expressing what they feel. So they learn to stuff their reactions inside.
So this starts at children. I mean, I know that we've had these conversations, but this is what I want everybody to understand. Like, he's looking at me like, this is Kelly. This is a
no. I'm not looking at you that way. I know what you're asking me.
So it starts with the socialization of children, of not letting them emote, which is one of the things that we talk about all the time, from our heart to yours. That's what this is about, is getting people to open their hearts and feel their own vibe and check in with themselves.
I mean, if you look at modern society, the process of in ordinary modern culture, raising a child is accompanied by separating the child from their inner feelings. I mean, think about school systems and what children have to do in order to conform to the demands of a modern education.
Right.
I mean, children have to learn at a very early age to obey rules, even though their main interest is playing or saying what they think, saying what they feel.
Or standing versus sitting, or wiggling versus sitting still, or wearing a t-shirt that says whatever that they want versus wearing a mask that's actually not a mask over their face to prevent them from breathing fresh air, but a mask like Silas, for instance, loves to dress up. And I mean, the kid is a different character every day. There are times that I know he would love to wear a Spider-Man mask or something to school. But now they can't allow any of that, even on Halloween.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's hard to believe, but it's clear. I mean,
lack of expression.
Yeah.
And when there was a day where they could all dress up, he was the only one that dressed up, like 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, what?
When we took our child out of the school system, the local school system here, which is really not bad, but it's a system. And so the Schulleiter, the principal, asked us, well, what was the problem? Was there a teacher problem? We said, No, there's no problem with the teacher. It's the system. And he said, what do you mean? We told him, look, you know, she's not enjoying herself. The teachers do a very good job in the classroom. They don't pay a single bit of attention to the behavior of children during the breaks. And during the breaks, there are kids that let out all their secondary drives, all their anger, all their dominance, all their fighting, all their name calling, all this stuff that goes on outside of the classroom, but in the confines of school that are damaging. And we won't have it. It's not what we want. We don't want cliques. We don't want for her to come home unhappy. We want her to have a good time in school. So it took us a long time to find an educational system that fit. And so she travels 1 hour each way on the train. And she's been doing that now for a year and a half. And before that was at another school that didn't work out for other reasons. But at this school, she's completely happy. And even after a month and a half or 2 months, we asked her, so how do you like the school and what do you think? And her reaction, her answer to it was, we just laughed for an hour. She said, well, you know, I have to take the train by myself every day, back and forth. And so far, what I notice is that I'm much more self-reliant.
And she's how old? 12?
Well, then she was not yet 11.
11, right.
She was 10. So now she comes home and she says, oh, you know, I have a whole group of friends on the train. There's a lady who works in St. Gallen. We take the same train every day. So we sit next to each other and talk. And then there's a guy who sits opposite us. And then there's kids that go to school. So
She's never been the shy one. I remember when she was 2, we're in restaurants, walking up to other people's tables and asking them questions, even if it's not even in her language. She's quite the being, Alina is.
She's still that way.
I'm sure she is. So this boils down to when we raise our children differently, there might be a potential with the consciousness to maybe change this miscalculation, biological miscalculation. Is that?
I don't think it's going to come from trying to drill this into adults, and I include me and you in that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're anchored in, we have lots of anchored values. And, you know, the goal is to raise conscious feeling children. Yeah. So that's the main thing. Don't separate them from themselves. Let them have their feelings.
Separate themselves from their heart, from their instinct, from their knowing.
Yeah. And now, you know.
And that's so challenging. I mean, psychiatrist Byron, let's just talk about that from control freak mom over here. I mean, this weekend, for instance, I was ready to pull my hair out about the screens. It's pouring rain out. It's been raining for days. I get it. I have a play date with a couple of his friends. I say no screens. Within 2 hours, I find them putting a screen on. I was like, ugh. And I get it at some level, right? Like, let them do their thing. They grew up with it, but boy, is it difficult.
I have to tell you, Alina has almost no interaction with screens.
Oh, he's making me feel worse.
Fairy tales. That's it. She listens to audible stories, you know. Yeah. I mean, she likes listening to stories, and she reads. I mean, she's a reader. She reads 3 or 4 books a week, and has a very strong, good relationship with the township librarian. She goes to the library twice a week, and the librarian already has like a pile picked out for her before she comes. Look through there. I think there's stuff there I think you'll like.
Well, and that comes from the top. That, I mean, I don't know anybody who has a better book collection than you, in all honesty. I mean, I've commented that I want dibs on his book collection for a long time, because he has a lot of Wilhelm Reich's books. That's one of the things, like, just to full circle this, like, you know, there are books of Wilhelm Reich that I still have yet to get through because it's such a difficult read. Cancer biopathy.
Oh, that's, you know what? You have to read Reich chronologically because it's all connected. It really, it's so connected. The thread that takes you from the first to the end is continuous. He never, you know, it's an interesting thing. I don't know whether it matters to anybody that we're talking about this, but he never threw any of his research material away. He saved everything. He said there's no such thing as a mistake. The only thing there is not understanding what you found. And right,
that's brilliance. I mean, right there, that is brilliance. There are no mistakes. It's only something you cannot yet understand.
You can't understand yet. So
that's life. There are no mistakes in life.
When we were kids, we had those black and white composition books that you couldn't tear pages out of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he kept all his research notes on.
Right.
And they were chronological. So he had rows of those books. And when he, you know, 25 years later, when he did an experiment and he understood something, he went back to where he didn't understand it in order to retrieve his interpretation.
What a brilliant man.
So, you know, I mean, he was gifted. He was very gifted. But also, what's the right word? Not just dedicated.
Devoted.
Meticulous.
Yeah. I
would say. Yeah. Meticulous as it is research.
And a researcher, as a true scientist, of trying to figure out life and why people tick and what causes us to make behaviors and changes and not changes, right? And that's, I almost forgot we were doing a podcast and then we weren't just having a conversation there for a second, but I had to full circle it. That's very funny. I really did. For a second, I was like, oh, I'm just talking to Byron. Oh, wait, this is actually for a podcast. Because the thing is, so many, for me, and I think for so many people right now, they want to see the change in the world. They want to know that there's the change. And everybody, you know, this terminology of, oh, be the change that you want to see. And I come from the perspective of similar, that like, the generation we have to change right now isn't this one, it's the next three. The only hope that we have is what we're doing now is going to change the next 3 generations of what's going on, because those that have, we're already a little too hardwired right now, right? And so people ask me all the time, what's my vision? My vision is for everybody to have vision. How many people do you want to affect? 23 billion. There's only 7 billion on the planet. But we got to affect the next 3 generations of people so that there's a shift in consciousness and awareness and emotions, because we're emotional beings having physical experience. And we need to bring enlightenment into that fact so that we can enjoy our lives and let a lot of the misery go away. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What were you going to say?
That's okay. I feel much more pessimistic than that.
Oh, I know you do. I'm the eternal optimist and you are the eternal pessimist.
I wish I were not so cynical. I really wish I were not so cynical.
My Virgo teacher, this is your Aquarian student. Please enlighten us as to why you're so pessimistic.
There's no enlightenment involved. It's like looking out and saying, are we going through this shit again? You know, I mean, it's an endless loop of people submitting to fake leaders.
Yeah.
And not depending on the way they feel and the way they think. I mean, this is what I see in the world. I mean, you know, from here, I end up watching television in English, German, French, and Italian. Now, French and Italian it's often a mystery to me, except that I understand attitudes. And it's all the same. I watch British television, American television, Swiss, which is not easy to understand, and regular German, which I understand. But the message in every single news program is the same. It's all the same. And it just depends on cultural implementation. So the news message is, if you want to travel, you have to get vaccinated. I hope I'm not getting you in trouble with you.
I don't care. Come on, bring it on. You know me.
So, our friends recently, the young couple that rented our apartment upstairs, they said, oh, we want to buy a bus like yours. They want to buy a bus and just travel around, just go places. And they discovered very quickly they couldn't. So they decided, we'll take the ferry from I think they were taking it from someplace in Spain to Morocco. And the day they decided to go, they shut the ferry down. So anyway, they ended up, they said, we're going to try anyway. So this is in the midst of whatever hotspot crisis was going on in January. And, the borders were semi-open, semi-closed. So they packed up their bus, got rid of everything in life that they thought they didn't need, and went off with their 2 kids and dog. And so they fully expected to be coerced into getting tested, going into France and Spain, and getting stopped there. But they said, what the hell, we'll go anyway. There was nobody at the border. There was no border surveillance whatsoever. So they got into France, and then they spent some time on the beach in France, and then they went, they had a Mediterranean holiday. Then they went down into Spain. Nobody at the border, nobody stopped them, nobody cared, nobody did anything. And
it's all fear. It's all, we're going to try to control you by the what ifs you don't, and the fear that if you don't do this, well, what happens if all of us didn't do it? Then what are they going to
do? There was a cartoon in German news last week with a bunch of people laying out on the beach, and not a big crowd. And then and it said, ungeimpft, not vaccinated. And people were in the water swimming and enjoying themselves. The next beach over, they had cops surrounding it with everybody laying on top of each other because there was no space, and everybody it says vaccinated.
It's going to be the separation of those vaccinated and not vaccinated, perhaps.
It was very funny. But sadly, I mean, from my perspective, while we're going in that direction, we will see within the next, I'd say, 2-3 years, tremendous amounts of neurological illness coming. So it's already beginning to emerge, but it's being discounted. And in fact, I mean, the illogic of the modern world saying to people, oh yeah, there are side effects, but it's worth it for the sake of society. I mean, this is the kind of propagandized mentality that people are being subjected to, and then using it as justification for things they say they don't want to do, but they do them anyway.
I mean, the amount of clients.
Amazing.
It is. Ian and I have talked about, clients will come in and be like, well, I didn't want to get the vaccine, but my boss, my mother, my husband, my whoever in my life guilted me into it. So I got it. And we're like, what? And Ian had a good point the other day. You'll love this. He said, do you remember when, because Byron called me in his category of age earlier. Did y'all see that? He was like, oh, those books we grew up with? What? We're not even in the same age category. But I and my husband are at similar ages. And Ian said, do you remember? He says to me this morning, do you remember when we grew up? I was like, dude, you're 16 years older than me. I don't remember when you grew up. Anyway, he said, you know, we were told and warned to not be peer pressured to do drugs like our friends, to not do mushrooms and not do marijuana and not do acid and not smoke cigarettes. Don't cave to the peer pressure to do drugs. And yet everybody's being caved into this peer pressure of getting vaccinated. Yeah. How is this any different? And why are people allowed to be peer pressured? Going back to the group dynamics and the leaders, like what I've seen in this last year and a half is the group dynamic, the concept of group dynamics has changed because of what you mentioned earlier, because of the internet, because of the airwaves. And they're trying to stop the group dynamics being so that the beach is more packed for those unvaccinated versus those vaccinated by their narrative. And across the world, it doesn't matter what your religious sector is, what country you're in, what your political sanction is. It's all the same news because it takes you away from what Byron and I are saying, from you, from your knowing, from your critical thinking, from logic, from reasoning, from rational logic thinking to go, does my immune system come in a mask and a shot, or does my immune system come from the way I live my life, the food I eat, the things I do, the way I live? And that whole body is the immune system of survival. It's an organism. It's not.
I could not have said it better.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me in many ways, because it's COVID hit, Byron, and I knew that we were living amongst people that didn't understand how their bodies work. I knew it. 2 weeks into COVID, I was like, okay, Heidi's right. I need to start a podcast. Okay, we need to get the information out there. People aren't getting how their body works. A year into my podcast, I'm like, why are people changing? Why aren't they understanding? Now that they understand how their body works, why are they getting vaccinated? Why are they wearing masks while being vaccinated? What is going on?
You know, Lenin, in the early part of the 20th century, Nikolai Lenin.
Oh, Nikolai Lenin. Okay.
Was famous for saying, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. That's who originated that statement. And now think about who repeats the lie often enough. Think about all the figures who repeat the lie often enough. It's astonishing. It's breathtaking. And it doesn't matter whether if it's on the left or the right from political perspective, they're all the same. They're all the same.
Because it takes them, I'm a flexologist, freedomologist. That's my new terminology. You'd be so proud of me. I'm no longer
a libertarian.
I am no longer orthorexic. I'm a flexologist when it comes to food. And I realized in this last year and a half, I'm just a freedom fighter. I just want people to have freedom of choice, freedom of their own, freedom of themselves, be free, just have freedom, because I realize that's what biological medicine has given me in so many ways, is freedom.
So I will say, I agree with you. And I'll even say it this way, that the deepest inner desire of all humans is freedom. That's the deepest desire. And it's what social systems want to control. So
the human instinct is for freedom.
Yes.
Society is to break freedom to control people.
And think about Adam and Eve. And
what's that really about?
What was that about? It was about self-consciousness, right? And you could even say it as the price of self-awareness. The tree of knowledge was tree of self-awareness. And from that, everything else followed, philosophically or metaphorically.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and look at social structures as we experience them now. They're really about suppressing your freedom of choice. How many people do you know in the States? I mean, I have friends in the States who are in lots of troubles because of their perspectives on health choices.
Well, you know,
Are you going, you are acquainted with those?
yes, of course I am. And my good friend that had to move out of the United States because of freedom of knowledge that could be imparted. Yes, I'm just going to say yes. Yeah, very familiar with that setup. And
but people, I mean, that's what people want. Yeah, they want to be free.
Yeah, more than anything, that's what we all want, is we want freedom. Yet I would agree that there's a superficial talk of we have freedom, as you mentioned it earlier on in the podcast. Like, there's talk about freedoms, but what does that really mean? I mean, my brother and I have been into it. I have one brother that's 100% on my page and the other brother that's completely on the opposite side of my page, right? And I'm shocked that either one of them's on my page. But the one that is, the conversation that we've had about is he's adamantly opposed to getting the vaccine, mostly because people are telling him to do it. So he repels anything that anybody tells him to do. But he will still wear the mask, even though he's adamantly opposed to it, when it's convenient and he doesn't want to like be given a hard time. I had this conversation with a colleague of mine and I'm like, yeah, but you can't have it both ways. I get that it's inconvenient. Do you know how many stores I've been kicked out of? But what I keep saying is, listen, if you're not willing to take my money, that's perfectly fine. I just need you to know that I'm not willing to wear a mask because I'm not willing to fall under the facade that has anything to do with anything other than control. So I'm choosing to vote with my dollars. If you choose not to take them because you want me to wear a mask, that's perfectly fine, but I'm going to voice that opinion. And I know it's uncomfortable, and I know that I have a confidence that most people don't have, mostly because of what I've been taught, because of what I've read, because of what I know in my heart, because I've been taught how to critically think as well.
Natasha is exactly the same way.
Shocking that Natasha and I would be exactly the same way. Natasha's his wife, my Swiss sister over there, who outside of
exactly the same. No, I don't, I mean, we're not going to fly anywhere. I'm not getting a test. I'm not wearing a mask. I don't care about that. We go by bus. We stay around here for right now. If you have to get it, if you could do a home test, I would do a test because it's just saliva. But here they want to stick a thing up your nose. It hurts. I'm not doing that. And it's funny, isn't it? I mean, really, the saliva test is an antigen test. It's accurate. The nose test is PCR. It's mostly false positives. I mean, it's crazy. And then we can end up having a whole discussion about data collection. But
well, yeah, and it's all part of the ability to manipulate statistics for the good, for the purpose of, like we said long ago, the difference between manipulation and motivation is intent.
Yeah, and here I was thinking this a couple of minutes ago. I mean, a big theme these days is that people do not want to be inconvenienced by any perceived restriction that's being thrown their way, especially in the context of the vaccination business. The governments have figured a way to get social control by placing amazing inhibitions unless you get, I mean, crazy.
long ago, I don't remember honestly if it was Bill or if it was you or if it was something I read or was something Ein said. I don't know. I've known this for 25 years, that the pain of change.
I said it, and it came from the Dalai Lama. It was something that I communicated to you, that I heard from the Dalai Lama. And I said, oh, I'm using this when I do emotional work. I have the courage to tolerate the pain of change.
Yeah, because the pain of change, when only the pain of not changing is greater than the pain of changing, then and only then will most people change, unless you have consciousness. And right, and that's, really think about what that says. When I can't take it anymore, then and only then will I change. Well, I'll never forget the movie. Oh God, of course I forget it right now. There's a movie that I watched there. The gentleman was an Irishman in the movie. And he was like he was the criminal, and he was sitting with an undercover cop in bed. And he says to her, just to let you know, I'm Irish. So if this relationship doesn't work out, you better make the change, because I'll deal with anything as long as I'll deal with anything, no matter how uncomfortable it was. And I thought to myself, well, there's my Irish heritage coming out. Because I swear it took me longer than most to feel the pain of change. The pain of not changing had to be so severely more uncomfortable than the pain of change, which is why my personal journey became more about physical body stuff. And it has to be the physical body for me to get me to change. Then and only then will I, and it has to be so uncomfortable before I make a shift. That was the old programming. I don't have that anymore. Now the littlest thing, I actually don't even need anything. I just go to optimization. But this is such a key for people to understand, that when you can have consciousness around this, you don't have to wait for the pain to come. You just change, because you're logically looking at it going, I mean, it didn't take long for us to go, I think we're going to open up and we're not going to wear masks regardless of what's going on, because the pain of not changing is greater than the pain of changing away from this rhetoric they're trying to sell us.
Exactly.
And so we just opened up, and now we're making all sorts of other changes. And I know it's uncomfortable for people as we make changes, but I also know that not changing in this time frame is going to cause more discomfort long term but you got to look long term. You got to know, if I allow myself to wear this mask when I walk in because it's more comfortable, what is that long term allowing?
Well, Kelly, I understand you, and we have to live according to our center.
Yeah.
And most people don't have that center. Most people don't have a center. They need leaders. They need somebody to tell them what to do.
So we have to listen to different leaders, and we have to have different leaders in charge saying different rhetoric that actually follows their own, instead of the myriad of reasons that people make decisions.
Reich said, don't follow leaders.
Don't follow leaders. So how do we get everybody to start following themselves?
Bob Dylan said, don't follow leaders, watch your parking meters.
So how do we get people to follow themselves? I mean, I do it through Sound of Soul, right? I mean, we haven't even had an opportunity for you to experience that yet, but taking heart rate variability, converting back in themselves, letting them feel their own, experience their own vibe, right? How brilliant is that? It makes complete sense to me, like why that would help people find their knowing. Breath work, taking some deep breaths, spending time breathing every day with yourself. That's a great way to touch base.
But people are focused on being out of touch.
But my optimistic side is saying, stop it, pessimist. My optimistic side, they can do it. They got this. You can do this. The pain of not changing is greater than the pain of changing.
But, you know, I mean, you know, me and music. So I'm just going to say people prefer to be comfortably numb, to quote Pink Floyd, right? You know, it's people are comfortably numb, comfortably out of touch, and they want that. They want no waves. They don't want to struggle. They don't want to be inconvenienced, and it's very problematic. I mean, people who struggle through life, they are really humans. We've traveled to Morocco several times. Americans say to us, "Really, you went to Morocco?" I mean, yeah, it's a wonderful place. People are very warm, friendly, peaceful, safe, all that kind of stuff. And there's a wealthy class, but most of the people are poor. Most of the people are poor. You go out to the villages, people are poor. They're so sweet. They're really kind. They live in the mountains. It goes down to zero. They have no heat. How do they live? We ask. How is that tolerable? We stayed up there and we were freezing. And they're walking around.
They're really human is what you're saying, because they've really lived through suffering. They've really expanded their comfort zone and became a stronger version of human beings.
Yeah. They have not lost their kindness. It's an interesting thing.
It is.
So
humanity is at a really
optimism. I hope for optimism.
I hope for optimism. That is the greatest sentence I've ever heard you say. You hope for optimism.
I do.
I'm quoting today. Byron said he hopes for optimism.
Natasha is very optimistic, and then she gets over optimistic. I say, "Hey, listen, this is the same stuff I've been listening to for most of my life. There's nothing different. Nothing looks better right now." She said, "Don't give up."
But Natasha and I have to talk every once in a while, make sure each other's on the same page. Listen, what you said, there was no revolutionary changes in the last 2,000 years, because essentially people have been the same, because the masses are, working for the rulers, which for those listening, like he loves music, like I love the Matrix movie, right? It's the same concept that the few support, or the masses support the few rather, and that we've all got to wake up to realize. And what Natasha and I are so optimistic about is now is a different time with different consciousness, that we've evolved to the point of consciousness. And ideally we get to break through this veil that Wilhelm Reich and Byron Braid today have accentuated so brilliantly.
I will insist it's a personal effort.
Yes.
It's not, for me, I don't see it as a cultural manifestation. I see that as a personal event. I don't think.
I totally agree. It's individualized, that it's got to stop being about the group, that it's got to be about the individual, correct? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that. I'm also saying that probably the majority of people have zero interest in it.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Zero interest.
Because they're not uncomfortable in their lives.
Right.
Yeah, because they're comfortable. They're content. Yeah. No, I agree.
So,
but, and I would also say though that things, well, maybe there's not, this might be where we disagree, is that life hasn't changed too much. Whereas I'm like, I think life has changed quite drastically. That the only way that life changes is when you have a few pioneers setting the tone, if you will. And that goes back to the leaders, which is what you're saying, that, don't follow leader. But if we have better leaders, perhaps that'll make the masses change to be in that individual mode, even though they did it through the masses.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think that the facade of culture has changed tremendously, but the inner aspect of culture has not. And if you think about leaders in the context of history, there have not been that many real leaders who were capable of influencing the kind of change that we're trying to talk about now. I mean, you know, a half a dozen to 10, maybe, right? You know, we have to go through the recorded history to go to Abraham, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and that we're running out of room now. You know, we have our major leaders. They brought enlightenment to mankind, and what's man done with that but misuse it? You know, it's been misused, and we've all misused it, and you know, we're working to get out of that, and not
individually, of course, we're working on getting out of that so that we get, yes, exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I know this is one everybody's going to be listening to a couple times, because you can see why there have been many conversations for hours and hours without end with Byron, Ian, myself, Natasha, and so many of our other colleagues. And I know that today probably raised more questions than it answered. That's okay. That's the point. The point is for critical thinking. The point is to wake up. The point is to start investigating why society is the way it is. And if you're unhappy, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. You're unsettled. And that's what we're talking about, is be a little unsettled. At the other side of it, there's pure joy. Like at this point, the guy I never seen without a smile on his face. I'm rarely without a smile on my face, because I live this way. I live knowing what I know, and so blessed to know what I know, so humbled to know what I know, that we are all connected and we're all part of it. And that's truly from my heart, from Byron's heart to yours. That's what we want people to understand. I'm going to ask, I don't know how long this is going to last, but I got one more question for you, and he does have a client in about 10 minutes. So I always ask,
This
not
is
always,
everybody.
I don't always ask.
What deodorant do you wear?
Yes, what kind of underwear do you wear? Actually, I think we know the answer. Do you, if you were to share a secret with the world and have the opportunity for everybody to hear it, and you had the microphone, and after it, you had no consequences to that secret,
Oh,
what would be the secret you want the whole world to know?
oh my God.
I was schooled a lot by a psychiatrist, you have to understand. So I think of deep questions.
Yeah. Don't worry about being an outcast.
That's a great one. You know what? I think he actually gave it more thought than anybody. And we thank you so much for that. Don't worry about being the crab that crawled out of the bucket and being by yourself, because you're not by yourself. There's a whole tribe. Not at all.
We discovered that here.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I mean, Switzerland is a very, I would say, conservative country.
And location small, like geographically tiny, like it's the size of Rhode Island. It's small.
Oh no, it's not as small as Rhode Island. It's
small.
it's maybe the size of South Carolina.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Yeah. Perfect scenario.
Like
South Carolina.
but, you know, I mean, change takes place slowly here, but it's consensual. And people ask me, so what is it like? I said, you know, in America, you can get away with a lot of stuff because the rules are very often not well defined. And unless it's egregious, who cares? In Switzerland, you are responsible. Nobody cares about anything unless you are not responsible. So they have rules that on the surface sound completely silly. For example, you're not allowed to make noise between 12 and 1 and 6 and 7.
I remember this rule. I remember being there. Going, wow, this country's interesting. Every day, can't mow your lawn.
And if you're in an apartment, you can't play loud music after 10.
The whole country.
The whole country.
Yeah.
So it is. So, you know, people have no trouble knocking on your door and say, it's after 10. Can you please turn your TV down or your stereo down? And one of the reasons we ended up in a single home was that nobody can say anything.
Byron likes really loud music. That
I said to my neighbor 2 summers ago, I said, does my music volume bother you? And he said, depends on the music.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I like it.
Right.
So, you know, that's the difference. As long as you're minding your own life and not stepping on somebody else's toes, you're tolerated. It's great that way.
So you can be your own individual, just
You can be your
don't let your individuality tread on others.
Yeah. I'll finish by telling you a school story. So in a typical school meeting, what do the teachers do? They tell you how your child is performing in school and what are the deficiencies and what, you know, that kind of stuff. The school where she is now, we had our first teacher meeting, I don't know, last July or something like that. Not a single word was spoken about the academic thing. It was totally went like this. Oh, Lena, she integrated herself totally into the school population. Within 48 hours, she was the center of attention and was the immediate leader of the primary school, not through her doing, but because all the other kids wanted to play with her. And so now she's learning how to separate herself from that. And, you know, she's not so interested in being the leader, not so interested in being everybody's darling. And, you know, it's interesting. She has a very dark sense of humor. And Natasha looks at me and says, I wonder where she got that from. And they said, and the teacher said, oh, that comes from you. Oh, it's not Swiss. And so then they said, and she's not afraid. Now, you know, Alina, they said, we were shocked. She's not afraid to dish it out and give it back. When the boys start to bother her, she goes right after them and she does not play softly.
Good.
Right. We were so proud of her. It was wonderful. You know. So she's allowed to be herself.
Yeah.
It's great. What she does these days, every now and then, she calls up the local veterinarian and says, can I spend a day working at your place and observing? I'm thinking about if I want to become a veterinarian. So I would like to see a surgery, an operation. And she does that every now and then. She's become a vegetarian, but one of our best friends, I'm giving you the dichotomies of who she is. One of our best friends raises organic Black Angus cattle, and they are who we buy our meat from. Now, I'm the only person in the house that eats meat, but Alina will call them up and say, it's time for me to spend the day at the farm. She gets up and gets there about 7 in the morning, and she works with the animals all day long. And I said to her, after she did this a couple of times, I said, you're a vegetarian. What's that about? She said, they need love too.
That's awesome.
Explains everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So
follow your heart. And
follow
don't be afraid when others.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Braid. Thank you so much, Byron.
Thank you.
thank you all for listening. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification so you know when we're going to be here next. And if you are interested in reaching out to Dr. Braid, what we request is that you reach out to me first, and then I will screen through those in all honesty, as I always have, to make sure that the people that are really interested in working with him, he does work with people via telemedicine at times. Some people travel to Switzerland to see him, but we want to make sure that those are people that are really serious about taking their health to the next level, because he only does work with certain types of clients at this point in his career. And so you can reach out to me, and then I'll forward whatever appropriate emails are to him. But you are welcome to share any comments. I will forward them to him about any comments that you have about today's episode. And thank you all so much for sharing your time today with Beats. And we will see you next time for more information about how people change and how your body really works.
Thanks, Kelly. Great to see you.
Good to see you too, Byron, as always.
Take care.